This podcast is brought to you by A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London Middlesex, both family owned and operated. By the Diocese of Huron, a community where families and individuals from Windsor to Owen Sound, Grand Bend to Port Rowan come together to worship and serve. And by Molly Maid. Make your home a healthy haven. Call Molly Maid London today.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be listening. Welcome to the latest edition of the Vicars Crossing podcast. I'm Rob Henderson from Holy Trinity St. Stephen's in London.
Kevin George here from St. Paul's Cathedral in London, Ontario. But we're not in London right now.
We're not in London, as you can probably see.
Where are we, Rob?
We found ourselves in Detroit, Michigan, in downtown Detroit, to watch the Blue Jays take on the Tigers today.
Eat 'em up, Tigers.
Eat them up, and they did today. They won the game, so all's good.
Okay, what are we doing today?
Well, what we're doing today is, when we're done here, we're going to zip home into our studio and connect with Martha Tartanic, and we're going to talk to the folks, Martha and her friends, through Future Christian podcast.
Future Christian.
Not the past Christian.
Not the past Christians,
Or
the future Christians.
Yeah. So we're going to talk to Martha about her podcasts and some of the issues we always talk about, share some insight around that, much more, so we hope you'll stay with us.
And we have some sponsors today.
Yep, we do have some sponsors.
Yeah. How about Dave Mullen?
Dave Mullen, really good guy at A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and London Cremation Center as well. So we thank Dave very much.
Yep, and the Diocese of Huron, a community of believers from Port Rowan to Owen Sound, and a whole bunch of places in between, Windsor, London, all over.
They take care of it all.
I've even seen the bishop, very recently, I think. Todd Townsend.
Actually,
I feel like I've seen him.
if you look in the background, you might see Todd walking by Comerica Park in downtown Detroit.
It's possible that you actually see the
sometimes
guy.
it happens.
It
It's
happens.
a rare sighting.
There you go. A rare sighting of a bishop, so we're thankful for them. And we have one other sponsor.
We have our good friends at Molly Maid. Make your home a healthy haven. Call Molly Maid London today. Thanks, Tricia. We love you, and we appreciate your sponsorship here at the Vicars Crossing.
All right, let's hear from Martha.
Welcome to this special podcast episode recorded for both Future Christian and the Vicars Crossing podcasts. We are here today reflecting on the question of why podcast? With all of us in full-time ministry, why do we carve out time to offer these conversations, and what do we think in turn that it offers the life of the church? Rob Henderson and Kevin George are the hosts of the Vicars Crossing podcast, and I am the guest host / occasional host / co-host of Future Christian podcast, along with Lauren Richmond Jr., who is not with us for today's conversation. I think it would be helpful if we just took a moment to introduce ourselves to one another's audiences. And I will say that this is a very Anglican forward recording for Future Christian. It's very Ontario, Canada forward episode of Future Christian and Vicars Crossing as well. So Rob and Kevin, do you want to share a little bit about your context that you're serving in?
Yeah, thanks, Martha. And hello, Future Christian. Good to have an opportunity to chat with everyone today. I love the name of the podcast. It reminds me of that. What was that song? Future Christian is a rock song. Future Christian. No, that's Sister Christian.
That's Sister Christian. Yeah, come on.
That's Sister Christian. Yeah,
Okay.
no, okay. Child of the 80s, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't exactly sound like
no,
the name of a rock
exactly,
song.
exactly. But no, anyway, really appreciate the opportunity to be here. My name is Rob Henderson. I serve as an Anglican priest here in London, Ontario, Canada, at a parish that we like to call Holy Trinity St. Stephen's Memorial. I've been the parish rector or priest there for about 6 years now, and spent some time in Windsor, Essex area before that. Spent a little time in radio broadcasting industry before I ended up following a call to the ministry. So, and I live here in London with my wife, Margie, and we have two boys my boys now are all grown up and out of the house. So I see them on Sunday when they bring their laundry. Other than that, we don't see each other too much. And a joy to be with Kevin, and we do our Vicars Crossing podcast here from London. So, really excited to talk about, our side of things and hear what you guys have to say about this kind of crazy world we live in now, in podcasting world.
Yeah, it is a Wild West podcasting.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, and my name is Kevin George. I am Dean of Huron Rector at St. Paul's Cathedral. Brand new at that, just started in January, but I've been here in London for the last 12 years, previously at St. Aidan's. And Rob and I connected down in Windsor, Essex County as well, because I was down there for 14 years. And originally from Newfoundland, ordained in the Diocese of Eastern Newfoundland and Labrador, served my first parish in Labrador West, Labrador City, Wallbush. But excited to be in the heart of downtown London now. We have some incredible work going on down here around redeveloping the space in order to welcome more people into it, and to find ways to take ourselves outside the building into our neighborhood to live the fullness of the gospel in ways that we can best do that. So, and I'm really happy for the term Anglican Forward. I think I'm going to put that on my card or something.
Yeah, I like that.
Kevin George, Anglican Forward.
Yeah, well, today we're all Anglican forward. Yeah. Actually, I should say, as part of my story, is that St. Paul's Cathedral was my home church for 4 years when I went to university in London, and I sang in the choir and got paid to do so, which was a great incentive to go to church in those university years.
No kidding.
It's really easy to sleep in on Sunday mornings.
It's kept me going to church for the last 28 years.
Exactly.
Getting paid.
Yeah. We might have just solved the traditional church's problem, haven't we?
We just need to pay everybody.
Where are they? Where are all the young people?
Yeah.
Just give them a stipend, and our problems are solved for sure. Okay. So that's a little bit of my background way back, but I serve in St. Catharines, which is right near Niagara Falls, Ontario. And I'm in a downtown church, a very historic downtown church, St. George's, extremely connected to the needs of the downtown, which are mammoth. Especially considering what a small city it is, you wouldn't really think that there would be such a problem with opioid abuse and lack of housing and poverty and food insecurity, but it is tremendous in St. Catharines. So our church is really involved in feeding ministries in particular, but that has led to a number of other really interesting connections with municipal politics and just getting the church connected into how we envision a better future for everybody in a pretty turbulent world. And I've been here for the past 10 years. I actually just marked 10 years of serving at St. George's. So I'm also a parent. My kids are well into their teens, and I'm really a fan of parenting teenagers. I know that's not like the feeling everybody has, but it's my favorite. I just love it.
Awesome. That's great.
So one of the things that we like to start with on our podcast in terms of how we kind of frame our conversations is just to get a little bit of background on how our guests have experienced change in the church, how they've experienced change in their faith and in the landscape of organized religion over the course of growing up or serving in the church. So, Kevin, why don't I put it to you first? Like, how have you seen change evolving in your time in the church? Yeah,
wow. It's been a lot. I mean, like I think the three of us, I've been around the church my entire life. As a little kid growing up in Newfoundland, in a church that, would see 15 people on a Sunday morning, maybe, and most of them were relatives, to moving to southwestern Ontario, where there was a diversity, because I didn't see that growing up in a small church in Newfoundland. But more recently, I think the change that I see, which is accelerating, is really around diversity and the issues that you named earlier, Martha, in terms of the deep social need that we have in our communities, particularly in the urban context. And we're seeing in places far smaller than St. Catharines, the same sort of deep need in communities, particularly as it relates to poverty, homelessness, mental illness, drug addiction, and all of that. And so for me, I think that a lot of the work that we've been engaged in as church over the last number of years really has I think the Spirit is calling us to redirect our attention away from ourselves and towards something else. And that something else is where God is at work in the neighborhoods, amongst the vulnerable, where Jesus doesn't say, I'm like the poor. Jesus says, I am the poor. And right. And so, we've been busy in our, pardon the Pierre Burton reference, comfortable pews. Jesus has been amongst the poor and with the poor and is the poor. And now we're really being directed to think about ways to engage that. And to find ways to engage what God is doing in many different aspects in our neighborhoods. And for us, for like me and Rob, that's a part of what podcasting is about, in a way that, a lot of people are not Sunday morning worshipers, but they engage their faith in different ways. And a podcast, for example, is a way to do that. So I think that there's an evolution of church, and I believe that I hope that the church is getting to a place where we're less clerical, less clericalism, more celebration of the priesthood of all believers. And the closer we get to that, I think the closer we get to the reign of Christ. So that's a little bit of what I think at the moment, I guess.
Yeah. When I think about, what's changed, boy. I think one of the things that I've really noticed, and like Kevin and you, Martha, I've been in the church for a while, since I was little, but it's the way that we see ourselves as church has really shifted. And in one way, that's been an incredibly difficult thing for us to do, is to turn our lens back on ourselves and say, this is how we've been or believe we are, and to turn the lens, as Kevin noted, kind of more outward, to say, what's God doing, not just in here with us, but out there with everyone else. That's been a shift that's been taking place, and it's been a difficult one, I think, and I'm talking about Anglican Church or traditional church and denomination in that way, to do that. And what we're discovering more and more is, everything we thought we knew about the church and Jesus and God and our communities and who we are, again, has been shifted now. And the ground underneath us has shifted, and we're saying, well, maybe I didn't know all the things that God was calling us to do or be, that there's something more for us to see. And so that shift has been taking place. So that's one of the biggest changes I've seen. And I was reflecting a bit on, this Sunday, as we record this, we're gonna read the Nicodemus story this Sunday, right? And there's that line in it. I was working on this yesterday. There's that line in it where Jesus says to Nicodemus, like, you're a teacher of the law, like, then you're coming to me asking questions. Why aren't you grasping what's going on? Like, so much stuff, basically, yet you can't see anything. And Jesus is trying to explain this stuff to him, and he's not clicking in. And for the longest time, the church in general has pretty much thought we knew it. We had it figured out. Like we were full, right? Our rafters were full, and our Sunday schools were full, and we kind of nailed it. And now we're looking around going, but I don't understand how things are now, and I've got to look in a new way. So for me, that's definitely been the shift that I've been seeing, and the thing that we're struggling with in a lot of ways, but is also leading to a lot of new life and new ways for us, which is hopeful.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I'm kind of with Kevin in terms of like growing up in a very small, struggling, rural version of the church. Like, I don't have any experience of the church being in a power position whatsoever. And I, like, the church was pretty fringe in terms of how people thought it mattered in the life of our small town. And it was considered to be a little odd to be a Christian. So the need for the church to reevaluate and be humble and figure out like who we are and what we have to say that could matter. I feel like that's sort of always been on the radar as far as I have seen, but there have definitely been a lot of failed experiments over the course of my lifetime in terms of what is going to be the great fix, what's going to make things better. And I think what I see right now that I just appreciate so much is a lot of honesty about, what we can control and what we can't control about where we are as a society, and how much that secular mindset, dominates even people of faith, and yet, like, within that sort of free fall of institutional religion as being a force that the rest of the world thinks is important. There is such a great opportunity, as you have both said, to be really clear about what we can offer, what that looks like, why it matters, and hopefully just a much greater sense of drawing close to the way of Jesus. I hope. I mean, that's why I'm in it.
Yeah.
I hope that's what we're about.
Yeah.
Right. And to be risk takers, to do things that we otherwise, that I always go by, if it feels like this is really going to be difficult and hard, then that's probably the way to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, if it's the easy thing anymore, then you're probably just trying to get back to the glory days or whatever that was. And we have conversations like this in our parish a lot about that. And like, we're going through a process now of thinking of redeveloping the entire land on which we sit, where our actual church would disappear, and we would put up housing, and within that housing, and affordable housing, a space for the community to be the followers of Jesus within that community. Right. And so obviously those are difficult conversations, because it's about giving up something and you don't exactly know what it's going to look like.
Yeah.
At least even though everything's falling apart here and our roof's falling apart, at least I know what I need to do here.
That's true.
Yeah.
Thinking a bit about that in terms of how I look at sort of sometimes our physical manifestations too of what's going on around us. So in our own spiritual lives, right? And so I think that, when you start to think about the lens that we bring in podcasting, you as Future Christian, myself and Rob in the Vicars Crossing, again, we could stick with what we're comfortable with, as Rob was saying about the building as it is, right? Or we could decide to sort of stretch ourselves a little bit. And I think that's what Rob and I had sort of hoped to do when we got into this. I mean, it was, Rob brought a wealth of experience in terms of his broadcast background, and him and I often found ourselves sitting at a pub with a beer talking about the intersectionality of faith and a public square, things that were happening in our, you mentioned municipality and municipal politics earlier, Martha. I mean, I think that's one of the things that we see a lot here in London, is there are really a lot of crossovers from what we believe following in the way of Jesus looks like, and what having a responsible civic voice looks like. And so for us, that really is the lens we try to bring to the podcast that we do. And the Vicars Crossing, we say, a space where faith intersects with the public square. And it really is around trying to invite on guests who are in some ways, either through their writing, their witness, their ministry, whatever they're up to, are really pushing the envelope in terms of reminding folks that our walk with Jesus is not a private practice, that there's a public element to that. And if we're not engaged in that, then we're missing something in terms of our faith. So that's a little bit about what we do, but talk to us about Future Christian and its focus and why it matters.
Yeah, well, I think that kind of the bottom line of Future Christian is that it is a church. It's a podcast about the church. It's a podcast about church leadership. It's a podcast about trying to be really clear about what we're seeing on the ground right now in church leadership, in church life, that gives us a sense not of like the crystal ball of the future, but gives us a sense of next steps. And I wrote an article about this recently, but I remember, one of my colleagues, used to talk about Wayne Gretzky as like an analogy for leadership. Like, you don't skate to where the puck is, you skate to where the puck is going. And like, that sounds really great. Like, of course you want to skate to where the puck is going. And he, like, my friend who said this is such a great leader, like, and is really good at knowing where the puck is going. But I sort of think that, like, the podcasting realm actually gives us a chance to, like, engage with where the puck is right now. Like, and there's something to be said about that too, right? Like I want to be part of opening a space that's really honest, really inquisitive, really curious about what we see happening right now, because I'm pretty convinced that that is incredibly essential for being able to discern next steps. And like, I'm the kind of person, I mean, if you talk to me about a 5-year plan, like, I just am going to glaze over. Like, I am not a strategic planner in any which way. But I think in my ministry, I've been really effective at being able to put vision into action by always being able to at least discern a next step. And I think part of discerning a next step is to be honest about where you are right now. So we like you guys, we interview people from lots of different backgrounds, and some are authors, some are just interesting church leaders, some are doing interesting projects in a variety of kinds of ways and denominations in the church. But that's, I would say, like, our overriding question is, like, where are we and what are we seeing?
Well, to carry on that analogy of the Gretzky example, and I think Wayne was always quick to say it was his dad who told him that it was a Walterism, but that you can't go to where the puck. Nobody can go to where the puck is going if there isn't somebody working hard to dig it out right now and send it. And so if indeed you're right that where we are right now is actually where the puck is, then that's the dirty work, right? Like, that's the work that requires sort of having to get into corners, and fight to get, all those pucks that Wayne picked up. Somebody had to root them out of the corner and get them where they were going and win the battles. And I think there's a lot of battling going on right now for us to try and find our space and know what that is. And I think that there's something in that. So, yeah, cool.
Right. Yeah, and that's all about the getting real stuff, like Martha, you're mentioning there. And I think it's something that was my point earlier, was just, we got to know who we are. We got to know, like, it's great to have the puck, but if you don't know, what you can do with it, then you're just shooting it all over the place. It doesn't matter. All right. You got to be able to know who you are. And that takes place mostly in congregational aspects too, in small communities right now. That we have to have these conversations about who we are in our neighborhood, what our gifts are, what we can do, what we can't do, who we're going to pass it to, and who we want to keep it away from. And sometimes those are hard conversations, but this is where we are right now, and it is I agree with you totally, Martha, that it's focused on what we need to be doing now to have these conversations.
Well, and there is an ecumenical dimension to that as well, right? Like, I mean, we started off by saying we're Anglican Forward today on this podcast. And, like, I don't know about the two of you, but I'm super committed to being Anglican. Like, I really, really love being Anglican. But that ecumenical conversation opening up and really listening to what our brothers and sisters are saying from other gifts and experiences of the church, I think is incredibly clarifying for us as Anglicans, right? And I would imagine vice versa. I mean, Lauren is a pastor in the Disciples of Christ denomination in the States, and I think is very committed to that denomination. Like, I think that we can really listen to one another and be, we can all gain something in our own traditions and what we have to offer by making sure that we're listening carefully to what other people have to offer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's so many other gifts, isn't there? I know Kevin could speak to this better than I. I know he's very connected to ecumenical work in his ministry over the years, and definitely different faiths and those outside of Christianity. But I know there's many gifts because Kevin, you've drawn me into some of those conversations that you've had with these folks, and the amount of learning and revelation that comes out of those from others is just enormous.
Yeah, I think we've seen, and that's become increasingly more important here in London anyway, in terms of our broader context. So we've had guests who are, Muslim, Jewish, across the spectrum, really beyond Christian conversations.
That's great.
And given some of what we've dealt with in this city around terrorism and Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, all that stuff, it's been an important conversation. And I think that it gets to the root of what it looks like to live out our baptismal ministry. I mean, if we say we want to lift up the dignity of every human being, but our first approach to the other human being is to try and figure out how to make them like us, I'm not sure what we're doing. Like, that's not the real baptismal call. So coming to learn more about ourselves by more deeply understanding others, I think that's critical. Ecumenically, interfaith as well.
Yeah. We don't have to be threatened by difference, that's for sure.
No.
So what do you think some of the conversations are that the church struggles to have? Like, what are the things that maybe we're all trying to get at a little bit that haven't been easy to talk about in the church?
I think one of the big ones now is really around diversity and inclusion. And I think that, one of the things we noticed, Rob will say the same, I think, is, post George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement, we've all been called into a space where we're having to deal with our white supremacy and what that's meant in the church. And those are difficult conversations. I just found myself on a committee yesterday, which I looked and I finally said on the Zoom call, look, I just need to point out the obvious here. We're planning something nationally. And I look at the screen and we're all a bunch of white people, middle-aged white people. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's something that we're all being called to wrestle with at the minute and own, because what I'm seeing in my context, the newcomers that we have to this downtown parish are like the United Nations. They're from all over the world. That's who the church is going to be and who it is. And meanwhile, we're still all pretending. And it's interesting to me that there's a physical manifestation in this big cathedral of what's going on spiritually, because they're all sitting at the back and around the edges. And then all these white Anglo-Saxon older people are in the core of the seating. And then we have this thing going on around us. And so the real work now to struggle is, how do we change that? How do we shift that so that, there's diversity at the core of everything we do? Our leadership as a parish, as a wider diocese, as a national church, what are we doing? I think that's the big struggle today.
Right. And to piggyback on that a bit, Kevin, is and I've started to experience it in my parish, is the difficulty sometimes we have is that we're not aware that we're not ready for ethnic diversity when it does show up in our parishes. Like, we don't know what to do. And my example is that I've had, and there's a couple of churches I know in London, because we've talked about it at our clerics meetings, is I've had some people from Nigeria come, and they've moved into the city a couple of years ago, and they're looking for community to connect to, and they come from an Anglican tradition from where they were, but they come in here, and we have a difficult time, just to name this, we have a difficult time even pronouncing names, right? I'm doing baptisms in a couple of weeks for little children named Nato and Chinaza, and trying to introduce them to people in the community, and it's just an uncomfortableness because it's not like Frank and Bill and John, right? So they don't end up going to talk to them at coffee hour and such, and it's not because they're not kind, loving people. There's a disconnect there. So we haven't had conversations about how to be ready for those that are coming into our cities, and refugees and people from different parts of the world, to prepare ourselves that, it's not going to be, as Kevin said, just kind of the white couple from down the street. What do we have to do to be able to respect the dignity of every human being? And that's the work of today, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, in our Canadian context, the truth and reconciliation conversation with Indigenous people is being front and center, like on and off, for a long time now. And I think in any of these pieces that you're naming, like around reconciliation, around decolonization, around inclusion, there can be a really easy sort of seduction into thinking that if we say the right things and if we talk about being inclusive, there's a lot of virtue signaling that can go on, but there is actually a sacrificial element to like making any of it work, right? Like there has to be an acknowledgement of how much our prosperity has been on the backs of the injustices that have been ladled on others. And if we actually want to get real about any of these things, like there are things that we have to be willing to give up.
Yeah. And I think that's always the challenge. And like I said, when I sat in this committee meeting, it was just the most obvious thing to me. But I think the growth is that I wouldn't have seen that 3 or 4 years ago. Right? Like, I have to be honest. I mean, in terms of convicting myself of my own white supremacy, my own privilege, the ways in which I've benefited, right, over others. And I just wouldn't have noticed that a few years ago. And I'm not saying that to say I've got it, because I'm still working at it. It's a nonstop thing. But I think that I'm not the only one. And as soon as I raised it, everybody else said, "Oh my gosh, you're right. We need to address this. It's got to be a thing." So I think that, to put some hope on it, I think the fact that we're having the sort of conversations that we're having, and I know you guys are having them on your podcast, Martha. We've had them on ours as well. So when you think about all the various guests we've had and some of the guests in each case, I think this is one of the themes that come up. I wonder if there are others that we can talk about as well, themes that sort of have surfaced from our conversations.
Yeah, I mean, definitely on Future Christian, I would say that the two themes around decline of the religious institutions and clergy health are two things that come up in a lot of different ways from a lot of different angles. And, there are a variety of ways in which the health and well-being of religious leaders is talked about, how we need to, support people who are kind of on the front lines of dealing with the anxiety of our institutions wanting to survive and feeling like the sand is slipping out from underneath them. And then, a lot of different angles and perspectives on what it is that causes that decline and what we can do to fix it, or what we can do to live more faithfully in the midst of it. I tend to resonate more with the guests who take more of the angle of how do we live faithfully in the midst of this reality, rather than how do we fix it? How do we make it better?
Right. Yeah, that's the theme I've always seen comes up a lot is, how are we in this transition time? Because we're finally saying, right, it's been a while, but we're finally saying, look, everything's flipping right now and we're right dead center in the middle of it. Like, this is not the church of our parents and grandparents anymore. So we're quite cognizant of that. But yeah, how do we remain faithful, and where is Holy Spirit pointing us to be in this transitory time. As Kevin mentioned earlier, God's at work in our neighborhoods and outside of us, way ahead of where we are. So how do we meet God there? Yeah, thank goodness. If God was going to wait for people to figure it out, then
truly,
we'd be in trouble. But like, how do we remain faithful and look for that and be cognizant of that in times of transition in the institutional?
Yeah, and I
church
think Rob is right. And listening to both of you just now, the other thing that came to mind, that as a word that's popped up a lot over the last year and a half, 2 years on our podcast anyway, is apocalyptic. It's been interesting to us, the diversity of guests for whom, when we talked about what's going on right now in their writing, particularly of these authors, as a revelatory time, right? Like, this is an apocalyptic time where the veil is being pulled back, and we're getting a clear view of what's going on, and I think that's been a thread that's run through a lot. Hey, Rob, like we've heard that a lot in our talks.
Oh yeah, and all of the different reactions to that veil being lifted back, because we see it so many different ways, right? We see people that say, "Well, no, I don't see a veil. It looks the same to me. Everything's fine, and I don't have a problem with that." And then that's one extreme, and then the other extreme is burn it all down, start all over again, right? And then there's that kind of in between. So. I guess depending who you ask, the lens through which we see that apocalyptic nature of it all is really important and powerful.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate how many people are cluing into that word apocalypse not being about, like a comet that's about to hit Earth and life will be extinct, like that theological lens of unveiling, of revealing, of revelation. We talk a lot too. I find a number of our guests help us to sort through that question of the relationship between the church and technology, which I think is pretty important. We had a panel discussion a few months ago on AI in the church, and I think Lauren started the podcast during COVID. So, there have been a lot of burning questions that have come up in the last number of years about live stream or not. Do we insist on people being in person in order to be the embodied community of faith? What about the virtual experiences of community and worship? And I think those are like pretty important things to wrestle with right now too. Like,
if I go off script a little bit, because you mentioned the pandemic or COVID, Martha, ask you guys, like, it's not just something that happened a few years ago and now we're done with it. It's had the residuals of it exist in our faith lives and church lives today still. Like, what have you seen coming out of that? And where do you see some of the hope or positive transition that's come out of that, although it was a very difficult thing to go through for us? You guys are starting to see that at all in your contexts? Like, was there a good thing about it at the end of the day that you can kind of say, okay, I didn't want it to happen, but I saw this come out of it?
I guess the thing that I try to stay close to in terms of the pandemic is not to take for granted the ability to gather. Like, I think living in Canada, like, it is quite easy to take for granted just that basic, incredible freedom to be able to practice our faith how we want to. Like, that is an extraordinary freedom that a lot of the world and a lot of history has not enjoyed. But that ability to congregate, I hope I won't take for granted again. I mean, I think coming out of COVID, I have gotten a lot less fixated on how many people show up for Sunday morning services and what number I'm writing in the book at the end of Sunday about how many people were there. Because I used to feel pretty much like I lived and died by
Yeah.
like the size of our Sunday morning congregations and what that meant about, how we were or weren't growing or maintaining ground or all of those things. And I think a lot
Don't
of the
don't get Kevin and I started on how
categories
the
shifted.
institution counts.
The metrics.
'Cause we'll
I have a
go-
I have a wild idea.
metrics.
I have a wild idea. Let's stop writing down the number.
Yeah. Wouldn't that
exactly.
be nice? It's
Yeah.
like when you don't have to weigh yourself any
What
longer.
the hell
like,
are we doing?
It's a very freeing thing.
Like we have these metrics. How many people were in your church on the Sunday after Labor Day? And the follow-up question should be, and who really gives a shit? Oh, pardon, who really cares?
Yeah, see, Martha,
Don't get
I
'em
told you.
going.
Here we
Don't
go.
get 'em
Here we go. Yeah,
Don't get them going. Don't get them going. Yeah, but I hear you, right? Like,
True.
how is that a faithful way of
Nah.
measuring anything?
Yeah, exactly. It goes back to
Well, it's
who
very.
are we?
Well,
Like, is this who we? Is this who
it's
we
very
are?
colonial, is what it is, and it all sort of assumes this.
yeah.
Like it's just crazy because but if instead, and actually it ties to what I think about your question, Rob, about what coming out of the or whatever this post-COVID time is. I don't know what it is, but I think the thing is, and it really ties into what Martha was saying about not fixating on a number. I feel like I hold things less tightly. Right. Because I think that we had a tendency to need to hold on to stuff, but I've seen the church liberate itself of more stuff during the particularly the closure time. Where
Yes.
I mean, our buzz line at my previous parish at parish council was, "Let's not let a good pandemic go to waste," and and so we got rid of all kinds of things that we used to do, and said, "Oh, we don't need to do that anymore."
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, we were liberated from it. So part.
Yeah.
Like what?
Yeah.
Can you just like name a
Well,
few
so
things?
we
I'm really
stopped passing a
interested.
plate around, and guess what? We've never resumed passing a plate around, and our givings didn't go down; they went up. We took the pews out of the church during pandemic and didn't put them back. We replaced them with chairs, and we've been able to reconfigure our worship space in all kinds of incredible ways. We decided we didn't need all the meetings that we were having because they were mostly to meet for the sake of meeting. So we were able to readjust where our priorities were and when was it important for us to be in a room together. Like those are just three that come to top of mind in a hurry, but it really was about saying, okay, what do we really need to be doing? Where's our focus? What are we called to be? Who are we called to be? And what are the tools we're using to get there? And then the other big thing, of course, which what we're doing right now probably testifies to this, is if you had to ask people, if I had to go to parish council in 2019 and say, let's install $10,000 or $15,000 worth of video equipment and live stream our services to the wider public, everybody would have said I was nuts. Now it's expected that that's just a part of what we do. And we've now come to understand more fully, I think, at least in my previous parish we did, that parishioners are not just people who sit in the pews on Sunday morning, that there are different ways to engage that. Right. And so when I was at St. Aidan's, people would say, the listeners of Vicars Crossing are parishioners, they would say. Because they tune in to hear what's going on. They're parishioners at Holy Trinity, St. Stephen's. They're parishioners at St. Aidan's. They're not us. They're people who don't have the ability to connect. And I quite like that. I like the notion that there are different ways. And so for me, I think we've been liberated from a lot.
And getting back to, what we've been talking about today, our podcasts, the reason that Kevin and I ended up doing the Vicars Crossing in the format it is was because we couldn't meet. We were in the upstairs attic of a local bar and eatery called Crossings, and we'd have local people come by, and we'd go up the stairs and bring our equipment up and sit in this room.
It was very local, very, very local.
And then all of a sudden we couldn't do it. Yeah. Very local, which was fine, which was good. And there were a lot of people to talk to in the city and so on. But then all of a sudden, now what are we going to do? Well, we figured out how to use this thing called Zoom. And we have a great producer named Ian Stevenson who's able to do all the technical stuff. And the next thing you know, we're connecting with people in England and Toronto and other places of the world and other authors and so on and so forth. So it just completely expanded the ability to be able to extend our ministry because of what we were.
And it greatly reduced my intake of beer because we're no longer doing it in the pub. So
that's true too. Yeah. That's true too.
Yes, yeah.
Saved a lot of money.
saved a lot of money.
So we've actually had different guests definitely on our podcast, like from what Kevin and I have done and what Martha's done, but we've also had some similar ones. I noticed Brian McLaren was on Future
Yeah, Future Christian.
Future Christian as well. I know he's got a new book out. We've talked to Brian too. But what have been some of the, when you think about some of the guests, maybe Martha, you can answer this, the kind of exciting ones or enlightening interviews? What are the highlights and the ones that come to mind for you?
Yeah, I mean, for both Lauren and me, we tend to go back to some interviews that he's done with Andrew Root, and his work around secularism, drawing on the work of Charles Taylor and so on. To both of us, that like just provides such a framework for what so many other people are saying, and I just really find it so centering in my life as a parish leader to think about what crisis I'm giving my energy and attention. So he says, like, we have acted as if the crisis is that people aren't coming to church. And so the problem we need to solve is how to get people to come to church. Right. But really the crisis is that, like, we live in a world that is dominated by a secular mindset. And like, the question that we need to answer is, how do we communicate the living God to a world that has sort of lost that transcendent framework? Like, I'm really interested as a parish leader in giving my energy and my sleepless nights to that. Like, how do we communicate the living God to a world that has sort of been trained out of being able to see it, but where, like, the living God is the fingerprints are all around us, the activity is all around us. Like, how do we become attentive to that? So I didn't do the interview. I think Lauren's interviewed him a couple of times, but I find that was like that has been such a highlight for me as a parish leader, and then as like kind of a basis for a lot of the other conversations that we have as well. Like that question of like communicating the living God. Yeah, like that feels really alive for me.
Yeah. I think about some of the all the people that we talked about from when we started, Kevin, up in the upper room there at Crossings with some local people, to some of the big names out there now, like the Diana Butler Basses and the Brian McLarens that we've talked about, and Phil Yancey that we had a chance to talk to. But what I found most wonderful about all of these stories is that God shows up, and that transcendence you talk about shows up in these people's lives in ways that are not only, but they're not just personal to them. They speak to the people that are in my pew as well. So to be able to hear their stories and see that transcendent God and point to that in their experience and their background and the story they tell, it gives me an opportunity to connect in my preaching and to the people I talk to outside of the church, to give me the ability to actually point to it. Because I can't do it on my own. Like, if it was just up to me, forget about it. But
and that is like sort of another main reason why we do this, right? Like, what a privilege. And as you say, isn't that amazing that can be such a common denominator across the big names and the people who are so talked about, as well as those who are just faithfully leading and reflecting and discerning and figuring out.
I think it's totally true, because I think about, like, two that pop to mind are Will Willimon and Philip Yancey. Are there any two human beings who've written more than those two folks in the last 30 or 40 years in a Christian context? Probably not, but both of them, in their own way, in their conversations with us, talk to the same language that I can hear from somebody who's in the pew here today, who's come in and is struggling with their faith, and that to me is really quite something. The other one that stands out for me for different reasons is Kwok Pui Lan and her book Anglicanism from a Post-Colonialist Perspective. And I think that book and that conversation for us as a church is going to be one of the most critical things that we can engage in the days ahead, years ahead. And I know she's, for those of you who are in Southwestern Ontario, she's going to be at Huron in the fall for the OR lecture, and hopefully here at St. Paul's on a Sunday morning as well. This is a conversation we need.
One that really jumps out to me is when, we often have to talk about or preach about or study about, where is God in the darkness? And we ended up talking to Romeo Dallaire.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, really?
Yeah, I don't know how you got him, Kevin. That was probably the biggest get.
I asked the question.
Here's a guy. Yeah. It was unbelievable. Yeah, exactly. Well, he talked to us, and he did. And, the story, he didn't get too deep into all the stories from Rwanda as the UN leader over there, peacekeeping mission leader, but it's all in his book. But we talked a little bit on the fringes of it. But there's a guy that, went to hell and back. Like,
oh my gosh, I'm going to go back and listen to that one.
Yeah,
that is incredible.
Talk about finding light in the midst of darkness. Oh my gosh, this guy's been there and did it and saw it
and has been living it out
so that
over
was
and over
pretty
again.
powerful.
With the post-traumatic stress and
Absolutely.
and the work that he's doing. I mean, this is a guy who was, and he talks openly about going from that to being on a park bench in Ottawa asleep in the middle of the night. And how his he wouldn't describe himself necessarily as a faithful Sunday morning Christian, but how his Christian upbringing was a piece of what held them together through that, right? So, it is an incredible thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's quite the witness. Oh my goodness. Well, let's take a quick break, and we can come back and finish up with some fun
We love rapid fire
questions.
All right, I'll grab a drink.
Okay.
Good. Is this okay, Martha? Is this what you were kind of hoping for?
Absolutely. I know that we jumped around a bit. But I think that's always what you want, is like to have a plan and then to let the conversation be what it needs to be.
Yeah, we rarely stick to it. We give scripts to our guests, but they always end up going all over the place. But
sometimes, you get a guest who really only answers one question.
Yeah. What I've found too, some of the Philip Yancey's and the Brian McLarens and stuff, they really are appreciative when you've done the reading beforehand. Like they go, that's what Philip Yancey said. He wrote a little thing for us, and he said, and these guys actually read the book, because they go into so many of these, and the first question from the interviewer is, so tell us about your book.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So, I interviewed Michael Graham, who wrote The Great Dechurching last year, and he said the same thing, like, oh, like these are questions that I haven't been asked yet. It's really nice.
Yeah. No, they appreciate it. They're willing to go. They'll get a little more vulnerable and deep when you've done your homework too.
Yeah, for sure.
Should have known better than to walk into my office.
Oh, geez. You got a lineup?
People in Gary's office. I said, hold it. I'm just getting a drink. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm getting out of here after this so no one can find me. Good. All right. Any special instruction here, Martha?
All right. No. Rob, do you want to bring us back with a kind of welcome back, and then you can ask the first question?
Yeah, you bet. Here we go. Welcome back, everybody, on the Future Christian Podcast and the Vicars Crossing Podcast. Thank you for being with us so far today. We've had a wonderful conversation, and hopefully we can do this again down the road. But as we come to the end of our time together, we're going to do rapid fire.
Yes, rapid fire.
I always like to do this once in a while, right?
With the sound effects.
With sound effects, sound effects are at no cost to you. We'll throw those in for free. So here we go. First question. I'll throw this out to everybody, and I'll answer it too. But if you could interview one person, who would it be?
Okay, well, I'll go first because I actually got to interview the person this week that I most wanted to interview, and that is Elizabeth Schrader Pulitzer, who is the Mary Magdalene Gospel of John scholar, who kind of went viral a couple of years ago when Diana Butler Bass preached about her insights into what has maybe been missing from our understanding of Mary Magdalene and the Gospel of John. So she's been on my radar for a couple of years, and I've been following her work just with like, I just like glued to every single thing that she does. And so it was definitely a dream come true to get to interview.
Neat. Okay. We didn't specify dead or alive, though, either, by the way, for this rapid
Oh, yeah,
fire,
I
so-
guess. Well,
so
if
you could-
it's
you could
dead
go-
people, then.
Okay, well, who's your dead
Yeah.
person, Martha? Let's get that. Okay. All right.
Anne Boleyn. Anne Boleyn.
Oh, there you go.
I want to
Anne Boleyn,
interview
okay.
Anne
Well,
Boleyn.
if I was doing dead people, I'd say Dorothy Day. I'd love to have that
Oh,
chat.
good.
Yeah.
Alive people, little off the wall. And if you're listening, Bob, give me a call. Bob Ray. I'd love to have Bob Ray on our podcast in terms
Oh.
of faith in the public square, intersecting with the public square, particularly as it's related to his work post elected politics and being involved in United Nations, etc. I'd love to hear to talk to him about faith, his own Jewish faith, his expression of that, and how that's shaped his public work. I think Bob Ray took a hell of a beating in this province and is far better, has done far
Yep.
more for us than he gets credit for. So I'd love to talk to Bob Ray. And
Well, put that
I
out
did
there. I
have
feel
a
like
chat
that
with
could
him over a
happen,
dinner
Kevin.
once years ago before we were ever podcasting at a round table. But I'd love to be able to do an interview with Bob Ray. So if you're listening, folks, you can get me in touch with Bob. Give him a call.
Yeah.
So dead, I had two dead, but one was the Apostle Paul, because I got to ask him some questions about these letters. I'm still flummoxed by some of this stuff. And Desmond Tutu. I read some Desmond Tutu stuff years ago when I was younger, and just kind of blew my mind. So, and alive, my thought was Barack Obama, because I've read his book, and I know
Indeed.
that faith played a role in his vision
Yeah.
of what America can be, right? And a lot of people didn't like that for a lot of different reasons, which is really a mirror of the gospel, isn't it? In the sense that it's this, but it can be this. Are we willing to enter into that? So I'd love to talk to President Obama.
Well, I hope for both of you that you get both Barack and
Okay,
Bob.
yeah. Maybe we can have them on together. That will get us some listeners. All right, so my
That's a
rapid fire
panel.
question
Oh, man.
is: when I'm not recording my own podcast, I am listening to Martha Goes First.
Okay, well, other than music, which I listen to a lot of music, but in terms of podcasts, don't judge me. I like to listen to podcasts about reality TV and the royal family, and I think that actually we can learn a lot about the world that we live in by paying attention to reality TV. But also, I just really find it very entertaining. So I stand by my choices.
Reality.
No, as you should.
I wouldn't
As you
have guessed
should,
it,
yeah.
but Hey, it's okay.
Usually I need escapism because every day is about church and reading theology and all this kind of stuff. So, like I'll just go to sports stuff and just listen to that. Even though,
That's another version of reality
that's
TV.
exactly, it's reality TV. and I can't remember the guy's name, and I'm kicking myself for it in the moment, but he does a philosophy podcast, and he gets into this really deep philosophical stuff, and it actually helps me fall asleep at night because it just puts you in another realm, and I always find that fascinating. So that's kind of
Okay. So in no particular order,
How about you, Kevin?
it would be any music Newfoundland, because I do listen to a lot of music. Meatloaf, it's a
Oh,
little bit of Meatloaf,
good.
Prince,
I support that.
a little bit of Prince, anything Bruce Springsteen, and on it goes. Podcast wise, and again, I'm not out to be judged here, but I'm a political nut, so I listen to The Bridge almost daily, which is Peter Mansbridge's podcast, and which is really exceptional. If you don't listen to it, you should listen to it because it is informative about what's going on in the body politic in this country. And the other podcast plural I listen to by doing the search is anything with Keith Morrison. From Dateline NBC. Yeah, I'm a big Keith Morrison man.
No way,
So
really?
because and then they found he was dead. So anything true crime, but particularly Keith Morrison, I turn it on and I put the earbuds in, and it helps me sleep. Keith Morrison talks me to sleep many, many nights. So
Awesome.
Okay. All right. And final rapid fire question. What do we most hope our listeners
for me,
get
I would
from
say,
our
I'll go back to the Keith Morrison thing. I hope they get a nap. No, I'm kidding. Rob, go ahead.
Yeah.
It puts them to sleep.
My hope is that somewhere in the midst of the podcast, they will feel a bit disturbed, because that's going to be a little poking of the spirit, I think. Because sometimes we do talk about things that, as I said at the outset, that we don't want to and that are uncomfortable. So if you're listening and there's a little something that's poking at you going, well, I don't know about that, then take that and run with it, because it's important.
I would say, just to pick up on that, the word I had in mind, similar, I guess, which makes it good that we're co-hosts, but is I hope our listeners are provoked. Disturbed, provoked. There's that business about disturbing the waters in the pool of shalom, and it's that go be disturbed, because there's much to do.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I would have a slightly different angle on, I think, a similar theme, but I think I just really hope for honesty, and that doesn't have to be scary, like that we can talk about scary things that are happening in the church and in the world and in the life of faith, and but we don't have to land in a place of despair. We don't have to be paralyzed. We don't have to feel like we have to run away from it.
Right. Good.
So as we wrap up, let's each note where listeners can go to find out more about us and about our podcasts. I assume that for both of our podcasts, you can
It's exactly true. We're on all those platforms, right? And you can also find us on Twitter, or whatever that's called nowadays, whatever Elon Musk decides it is. Facebook,
Twitter, X.
Just look up The Vicars Crossing, and our webpage is thevicarscrossing.com.
And there's episodes on there and links to many of the authors and their books as well, because people always say to us, where do I get this book? Well, it's all on the website. Click, go.
Right. Yeah, and we're at futurechristian.com and on Instagram, Facebook, kind of all of those regular places, and we're on as people as well, Instagram, Facebook, all of the usual things. I don't think we're on Twitter or whatever it is.
You're not missing anything, you will find me individually on these platforms. You won't find Rob, because he's got the sense to be liberated from that. So.
No, I don't.
Yeah.
I found myself getting too angry. Right. I couldn't want to go to bed angry every night reading Facebook posts.
Yeah, we support that. Yeah. Well, we always wrap up on Future Christian with a word of peace. So can we wrap up on our joint podcast with a word of peace? Okay, the peace of
and
God
with you, Martha, and thank you for having us on, and may God's peace be with all who listen to us today, too.
And may we go out in peace with each other to love and serve the Lord wherever we may be.
All right, thanks again, Martha, for inviting us to do this. This was fantastic. We really enjoyed it. How we ended up back here again so quickly. That's our friends right there. That's where faith intersects with the public square, folks. Right there, on that trolley. So, thanks for being with us. Thanks, Kevin. That was a really good day. Good chat and a great day. And remember, my friends, you always look both ways before you cross the street.
Thank you for listening. Our hosts are Kevin George and Rob Henderson. Our producer and composer is myself, Ian, with original artwork done by Elizabeth Dodman. If you have any questions or want to know where to find us, tweet us at Vicars Crossing or find us on Facebook at The Vicars Crossing. If you have any other questions about anything heard on this podcast, leave us a comment or look in the description to find out more. Thanks!